senior advocate Supreme Court, who is going to talk to us as to the role of civil society and human rights. Dr. Aditya Sondhi.
Thank you very much, Justice Sri Krishna, my esteemed senior at the bar, Mr. Nishant Bhushan, colleagues, friends from CPDRS, and of course, friends in the audience. Thank you for having me this afternoon. हिंदी में अरे सबने इंग्लिश में बात किया तो मुझे हिंदी में क्यों कह रहे हैं आप ये तो डिस्क्रिमिनेशन हो गया आप मुझे इंग्लिश में बोलने दीजिए कभी कभी हिंदी में भी बोल देंगे we senior advocates are sometimes used to now we have a ಸರ್ ತಾವು ಹೇಳಿದ್ರೆ ಕನ್ನಡದಲ್ಲಿ ಮಾತಾಡ್ತೀನಿ ನಾನು in fact maybe I should start with the language policy issue now.
How civil society has gone into this kind of division because of wrong policy.
Sir, you mentioned Justice Krishna here speaking to in Tamil. It felt so nice. Though I'm originally from Bangalore and Kannada is our mother tongue there. But many of us speak Tamil. It felt so nice to hear. Tamil pesna sir. So anyway, I'll return to English. Friends, I have the task of following up on Mr. Bhushan's powerful opening remarks as to the role of society and of course civil society within society as a subset in preserving not just the fight for human rights but also larger battles relating to secularism and democracy, which is the theme of this afternoon's function. Just last year I published a book called Poles Apart, which was the publication predominantly in political science on the role of the military in democracy in India and Pakistan. And I compared how democracy in Pakistan, including what was earlier East Pakistan and later became Bangladesh, the role of the military really undermined any chance that the two countries had at constitutional democracy. And in making that comparison, I tried to argue that India's commitment to the constitution in its early decades was the game changer because we were able to keep out extra constitutional institutions. That, of course, is a simplistic perspective now, considering the situation we're in today. But in both Pakistan and Bangladesh, two significant churns took place in their history. One was in 2007 in Pakistan when President Musharraf, himself a general who really had no business to be in civilian governance, had sought to suspend the Chief Justice of Pakistan, Justice Chaudhry. And what was hitherto really not seen in Pakistan at that level was this groundswell against the president and, in a way, against the establishment, against the army, against the ISI, all of whom are the moving forces in Pakistan. And that movement was led by the lawyers of the Supreme Court in Pakistan, and it quickly picked up groundswell, and other institutions, the media, civil society joined in. So much so that President Musharraf had to backtrack in some ways, according to me, that was the beginning of his end. It showed the people of Pakistan that there was great force in societal movements. So also in Bangladesh, who actually, despite it being younger and born in very difficult times, has had a better run in its experiment with democracy than its elder brother Pakistan. But that said, the recent fall of Sheikh Hasina was something that was driven by the students' movement to begin with. It's a different matter, and I don't have time to go into who hijacked it, whether there were foreign hands, political hands, right wing hands, etc. But the fact is that there was a groundswell when the student groups found her to be authoritarian, impervious to the demands of her people, and generally an autocrat. But in both countries, unfortunately, the institutional support that is needed to springboard you onto better democracy was missing. And that's where we have historically had an advantage, in the sense that we have had superior institutional traditions, if I may say, which have helped us develop along the way. And Mr. Bhushan made reference to, I think, most of them: the judiciary, the media, the election commission, the IAS, uh, and so on, many of whom are there. And I must mention the military also, because in my research, I pay credit to the military for having remained a secular and apolitical institution that created room for our democracy to grow. But, friends, today, when you face an institutional crisis with which we are all agreed, where perhaps every one of these institutions that has been mentioned or even not mentioned is under some form of threat from within or without, then the question is, where do we stand? And I think for us, then the strongest ground to stand on is that of civil society. And for society to take upon itself that role as an institution in itself, we speak, friends, of the societal or the social relevance of institutions often. Even when I write about the army, I say that it has a social relevance because it's secular and apolitical. But we need to now turn that on its head and speak about the institutional relevance of society. Because society, for too long, has been seen as some kind of loose, ad hoc, unstructured organization which has really no larger say in the decisions that are taken on our behalf. But if we are going to talk about democracy, we're going to talk about secularism, then I think that buck stops heavily with society, especially at the times that we are right now. From my own experience, friends, some of the uh, matters of worth that I have been able to associate myself in, where there has been, a fight on matters of human rights, has really been through NGOs and societal groups. You don't you don't see anybody else taking that up. It's very difficult many times for victims to be able to take those issues up. Take the Assam migrant issue. I can't say much, the matter is sub judice. But suffice it to say that the tens of thousands who have been declared as foreigners and languishing in tribunals, in camps in Assam, have many times not even had access to challenge orders passed against them. It is on the record, and this has been stated in Parliament, that a large number of those orders are ex parte, and they are passed, sir, by tribunals that are, for people like Justice Sri Krishna, who've been on the bench for a good part of their lives. When you see the makeup of those tribunals, you wonder how judicially sound or independent those tribunals are. And to bring those cases to the attention of the court, whatever their future may be, is really the role of society. Unfortunately, you have legal aid groups and camps who are fighting that battle. They are fighting that battle in Chhattisgarh. They are fighting those battles in other areas. Even something like the hijab issue, which arose from my home state, Karnataka, where ostensibly it was simply a matter of uniformity to say that you will not wear the hijab in college or in school, was a form of indirect discrimination, according to me. And that was because it was really targeted not just at a particular community, but it had a gender dimension to it. And worst of all, in my limited understanding, it was really targeted at that strata of Muslim society where young women were probably the first learners from their families. So they already had to make this compromise with their parents and say, all right, let me go to college, but I'll wear the hijab. So if you're then denying that strata, that socio-economic strata of young first learners, of women, we go on about Beti Padhao, etc. What you're indirectly doing through the imposition of such a uniform is really denying someone an access to education. And that, according to me, was rather sinister. But that fight, again, was fought not just by young, brave girls who were directly affected, but also by social activists, by scholars and educationalists who saw how dangerous this trend could be. And friends, we can see it if you put each of these in silos and say they are all standalone, but when you put them together, you begin to see the larger patterns that are emerging. You speak of tolerance, etc., but let's be frank, there is a growing intolerance within us. And unfortunately, there, I think in many ways, sir, the blame lies with society also. We cannot simply look outwards and point at institutions. I think that failing is ours. The sooner we own up to it, the better. It's our own friends, our own families, our own communities, alumni groups, etc., who are often fanning this fire. Probably that atmosphere has been created because of political developments in the last decade. That's a different matter. But to pick that up and run with it, to feed that poison, to suddenly, today, if Mohanlal prays for Mammootty at Sabrimala, people are uncomfortable with it. How can you pray for a Muslim? I mean, I thought that was a shining example, not just of secularism, but really of friendship. I don't think Mohanlal looks at Mammootty as a Muslim. He looks at him as a friend or as a colleague or a brother from his profession. That, friends, is secularism. Tolerance is one thing, you're just tolerating, you're looking the other way. But if you're welcoming, and that was what Baba Sahib spoke about when he said, fraternity is most important amongst the preamble to Dr. Ambedkar. Why was it? Because fraternity is actually an overt feeling of brotherhood and sisterhood, which I'm afraid is actually on the wane, and that blame in some ways is with society. So the role of society in all of these high sounding aspirations, of course, is there in an activist sense, but it's also, I think, a time for self reflection on society and people around us, and how much do we let slide. I know you don't want to lose friends. We probably don't want to become like America, where I know spouses have divorced because one is Republican and the other is Democrat, and there's no middle ground, and that has reached absurd levels. It's going to become even more absurd now with the new establishment in the US. But are we going down that route? I don't know. But what is the way out? Can you at the same time let that foment? You may leave a group, you may back out of a conversation. You don't want to be fighting friends and family all the time. But maybe somewhere there is a duty on us also to call it out. Maybe even politely try and work on people, to try and get people around us to really reflect on what our constitutional ideals are. We were not like this. Even 15, 20 years ago, I do not at least personally remember this kind of vitriol and shameless kind of positioning that our society has come to. And I think that is a challenge that we need to meet. Um, Mr. Bhushan referred to the role of the social media, and he could not be more correct. Because today, and for those of you who have heard Justice Murlidhar's scholarly exposition at the B.G. Varghese Memorial lecture just a couple of weeks ago, will see the real crisis that the Indian media is facing in his inimitable way, in a soft spoken way, and based on empirical data, not value judgment. He shows us a mirror which is quite shocking as to how mainstream media in India is either pliant, or it's corporatized, or it's compromised, or it's all of the above. Of course, he also reflects on the role of the judiciary in all of this, which is a separate topic in itself. But when this is the position of media today, then in some ways, civil society is the answer. You look at what's happened with Gaza. Most mainstream media houses in the world were not willing to pick up the issues objectively. When 300 children were killed at a hospital, the headline would say 300 dead in Gaza. I think that kind of whitewashing is unfortunate. Being objective is one thing, taking sides is another. 300 people dead is very different from saying 300 children killed by Israel. I realize the latter statement is a loaded statement. Maybe there's a value judgment that comes into it. But then this is the time for facts to be put out as they are. If you're going to be whitewashing all this, then you're failing in terms of bringing the truth to the people. But the answer to that was the thousands and thousands of Twitter accounts that gave you the real truth. People who were literally themselves in the firing line, telling you how things are and where things stand. And that was the real eye opener. Otherwise, who knows where the truth would be and what a casualty it would become. But in this context of the media, if I'm allowed a couple of more minutes, I want to say that the recent sort of crisis, if you will, is the issue that has now come up in Delhi with regard to cash being found at the house of a judge. And I am not in a position to make any comment on it. The inquiry is on. I do not know where the truth lies, whether the truth will ever come out. Personally speaking, I have never heard anything of this sort about that judge. I've only heard good things and seen good orders passed. But beyond that, everything else is a matter of inquiry. But it's not so much that isolated incident. I think it is how that incident has now become a springboard for the demand for the NJAC to come back, the National Judicial and Appointments Commission. And I find that rather ironical that this sort of thing would lead to a paradoxical justification to return the power of appointment of judges to the executive. And I welcome Justice Patnaik ji on stage. Now, this is where, friends, your role and our role as society again becomes important to be careful before we are carried away with some form of propaganda. That this sort of incident should mean that the baby and the bathwater are both thrown out. That the baby and the bathwater are both thrown out so as to repair the situation. Many times, solutions can be worse than the problems themselves. And we have to keep a close eye on the situation because, in many ways, the last bastion that is holding these human rights and secular rights alive is the judiciary. Friends, finally, I would like to only say that the threat to rule of law is grave. As I said, power has been historically always been abused, maybe in different measure. But the problem is when society begins to celebrate that abuse of power, when lynching is celebrated and welcomed as an acceptable form, when police encounters are celebrated. I find that most appalling that, an under trial who's in the custody of the police has 4 or 5 policemen around him. His killing in cold blood is celebrated by society as some act of gallantry. I do not know what gallantry there is in that. In fact, your job is to be able to take care of that under trial, bring them to trial, and take it to its logical end. But when society is celebrating this sort of behavior, then the threat to rule of law is serious. So again, I say it's not enough to look at institutional failings alone. We need to reflect on where we stand as society. And when we realize the effect that we can have as people, both good and bad, I think that is when this change will emerge and the institutional relevance of society will be far greater. Thank you once again for having me. Thank you.